Today we'll discuss Robert Frost and the key features of his poetry. Robert Frost was born in San Francisco, California on March 26, 1874. He is a well-known modern poet and is generally regarded as a poet, teacher and a man of wisdom. He had a profound knowledge of literature, history, science and philosophy. Hence, he can be termed as a classicist of very high order. Frost neither describes the situations and conditions of life of modern society and nor does he write about political and economic problems of his age. He does not aloof himself from the contemporary society. He has penetrated from social actions to intellectual problems of his age. Frost was a poet who spoke with rhyme and meter of all things natural, and in doing so plumbed the depths of emotions of people in all walks of life. Louis Untermeyer describes Frost's work as a poetry that sings and poetry that talks. His poems are people talking. Thus, in describing a simple act of nature, the mundane or the heartfelt grief of people, Robert Frost displays an insight into the sometimes simple instances in our lives that, when brought together, constitute our very lives. One aspect of life that touches everyone is death, whether it is the loss of a friend, neighbor, or beloved. Some of Frost's most beautiful work displays the stark reality of life. Robert Frost is one of the few poets in English literature that shall never become outdated, because his poetry is an echo of every sensitive man's experiences and his limitations. The main theme of his poetry is the despairing state of man in his life. In all of Frost's works, the reader sees encapsulated in verse a depth and level of human emotions that is not easily discerned by the eye, but rather felt and nurtured in the heart. Frost uses nature at its most beautiful to explain life at its harshest. With his down-to-earth approach to his subjects, readers found it easy to follow the poet into deeper truths without being burdened with pedantry. Robert Frost's chief concern is with man. The focus in his poetry is on man's position and attitude, and especially on his feelings. Robert Frost reveals a good deal about his conception of universe and external reality in his poetry. But what is important to him? It is man's thought, emotions and behavior as they determine or reflect his relationship with the universe. What does man do? And how does he feel in a universe as dark as this? That is the central question for Frost. The answer is found largely by the fact that man is sharply limited as Robert Frost sees him. Man is limited both in his intellectual power and his awareness and understanding. He has a different way of seeing this universe. He is different in his thought and in his intellectual power. But behind the largely unruffled public facade was a personal life of great stress and sorrow. None of the traumatic experiences of his personal life found their way directly into Frost's poetry. To the broad public, Frost may be a painter of charming postcard scenes and a front porch philosopher dispensing consolation and cracker barrel wisdom. But behind these stereotypes, there is in Frost's work a terrifying poet whose deepest note is not of one of inevitable human isolation. This phrase is given by Lionel Trilling. Life In a life that is more painful than most, Frost struggled heroically with his inner and outer demons, and out of that struggle he produced what many consider to the single greatest body of work by any American poet of the 20th century. He uses traditional forms and structures while exploring modern themes of alienation and isolation. Throughout his poetry, we find motifs of seasons, alternation of night and day, natural phenomena, and rural images. Thus, Frost's poetry can be commented on as a poem begins in delight and ends in wisdom, begins as a lump in the throat, a sense of wrong, homesickness, lovesickness, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. Thank you. We'll discuss later the major themes in Robert Frost's poetry.